muted when they come in.
Yes, sunshine, beautiful, but I can't block the sun out of this window, so it looks like I'm yin yang here. Yin and yang.
Okay. That's okay. That is a-okay. Okay, so let's get Carolyn in here, and then I will move things along here. Carolyn White, you're not on camera. Is that your preference? She must be connecting. That's okay. Good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, Fred?
Yes. Yeah. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. We have a very special guest with us this evening. Cheryl Kennedy is from Grand Ronde, and let me tell you a little bit about her. She's serving her 5th term as chairwoman, well, last 10 years as chairwoman of the Tribal Council of Grand Ronde. She's also a commissioner on the Commission on Indian Services, appointed by Oregon legislature. She's a member of the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Tribal Advisory Committee. She is also a board member on West Valley Hospital Foundation Board, board member of Willamette Heritage Coalition Board, board member on Oregon Business Association of Directors, delegate to Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board, member of Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians, member of the National Congress of American Indians. She serves as Tribal Council Liaison to the Cultural Committee and Health Committee. She was appointed by Governor of Oregon to serve on Federal Laws Committee for the Oregon Health Fund Board. She was appointed by Oregon Health Policy Board to the Oregon Health Improvement Plan Committee. She's a former commissioner of the Rural Health Council of Oregon, former commissioner of the Oregon's Women's Commission, and she's a former steering committee member of Oregon's Rural Health Education Centers. She had a 30-year career as a health administrator working with tribes, including her work as tribal director for 15 years. She also served on as executive director of the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. She was selected by the Potlatch Fund to receive the Fran James Cultural Preservation Award at the Honoring Awards Gala in 2009. She was Health Administrator of the Year for the Department of Public Health, Indian Health Services. She is considered to be an outstanding leader in healthcare by the Oregon Department of Health. And she's been recognized nationally for her contributions to elevating the health status of Indian people by the National Indian Health Board. And if that's not enough, she also loves sports. She has served as a coach for the women in co-ed softball and coached girls women's basketball. She makes regalia and Native American jewelry as other beadwork. She's a believer in art, and she loves her culture and wants it to be revitalized to the fullest extent. She's college educated, and she encourages everyone who wants to further their education to vigorously pursue that endeavor. She believes in dreaming big, developing new ideas, and bringing the future to us. She dreams that her tribe will have a healthy, happy, and strong members. It is such an honor for me tonight to introduce Cheryl Kennedy. Please welcome her.
Thank you so much, Lori. This is a pleasure to be here this evening. I want to express appreciation to all of those who are joining us, because I know it's a beautiful evening, and we could be doing a lot of other things, but so thank you for coming. Again, thank you for the introduction. I was sitting here thinking, wow, who is that? but it's true. You know, the area of health is very broad. And so, you know, and just to give a little background on that, my father used to, there were 6 of us. used to sit us on his knee. He was tall. He was 6'6" or something like that. And so he would sit us all on his knee and he would talk to us. His first language was Sioux. He was a Sioux Indian. My mother is from Grand Ronde. And so from the Grand Ronde people were Umpqua and Rogue River, Clackamas, and Shasta. So anyhow, he'd sit us on his knee and he would speak to us in Sioux. And he would ask us what we would want to be. And he'd explore different ideas with us. And I always thought, I'd like to be a teacher. And so he's very encouraging in that area. And so education was always built in from the start, that we need to pursue education, that learning is great, it's fun. And that he also said, one day, you as a Native American, you're going to be in the position to help lead this United States of America because of our cultural teachings and our traditions. They're going to be prominent and they'll be needed. So, you know, I sit here and I think about that and I think, yes, that's coming to be. And of course, being a leader in my own tribe, I think about that a lot and the role that we play and that our purpose here on this earth, everyone has a purpose. It's up to us whether we're willing to accept it and step into it, but it's there and it's there to serve not just yourself, which it will help, but the greater good. And that's always been my approach to whatever I do, is to know that my work in health was really connected to the people, into healing. The healing not only included our physical bodies, but our mental and spiritual, our soul, as well as our environment. We have to take care of the land because that's what sustains us all. We do not get food from the moon, nor from any other planet. It's right here in our backyard. And so all of that together, I think, behooves us to leave this place a better place than when we came into it. Unfortunately, we've all witnessed a lot of damage that's been done to our land, the pollution, the contaminants, the toxins, all of those things. So that's something that's very important to me. And I think as human beings, we all have that responsibility to our future generations. And Native Americans, you may hear the saying, we look 7 generations ahead. And so when I think about that, I think of my probably great-grandchildren, and what kind of contribution, what kind of teaching and training did I leave for them? So with that, I will go ahead and start my remarks. Of course, tonight is talking about inequities as there are in Native Americans and what has happened. So you have before you a little presentation, and it's called the Tribal History and Interests, and we can move to the next slide. So I want to talk today a little bit about the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. We're located west of Salem on the way to the Oregon coast, about midway. The Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde is the largest tribe in Oregon. Now, you don't hear that in history books because those things are not taught. The native histories really aren't in history books. So you get a little preview of what Grand Ronde is about. So our tribal vision and role regarding ceded lands and natural resources is really, I mentioned that I believe we all have a role in making sure that our land, our air, our waters are clean and healthy and are able to sustain our future generations. So in that, we do have a large natural resources department that's involved in all of those areas. We do a lot of work on the rivers, and we're a people of the river. We are fishermen, we are hunters, and we are gatherers. So it's very important that our natural resources embed our culture in all of those areas. So the other thing that I just would briefly mention, that because we are a tribe, there are certain laws that are existing that require the federal government agencies to consult with tribes. And the state of Oregon also has a consultation policy. I serve on the Commission on Indian Services, which is really the body that interacts with the Oregon State Legislature in developing laws and approaches for all of the areas of Oregon. But the consultation process is a formal process. And it's the idea that before the agency or the state or the government decide that they are going to take an action, they involve tribes, because the land holdings that we have are ceded land holdings. And you'll see a map in a little bit of what that means. We still have an interest in it, even though the treaties designated certain boundaries through their application, yet we still have a role there. And so when they're, for example, there might be the Gordon pipeline that's being developed, the state comes to us and the government comes to us and consults with us by asking us, do you have concerns or any comments about it? And of course we do, because we know it's a huge pipeline that will run across miles and miles of land. And, you know, the main concern is if there is a breakage, if there is some leakage from it, how will it affect the environment? As you know, or may not know, that our ancestors are buried all over the place. We had ancestral burial grounds that are just polka dotted all in Western Oregon and are very important to us. The burial sites are no different than cemeteries, historical cemeteries that you see here in Oregon about the pioneers and the immigrants that came across from the eastern United States to the West. Those cemeteries are very sacred. And so in the same way, ours are sacred as well. And they are our grandparents. So they are our ancestors, and we're very concerned about them. So the consultation process has a pretty strict protocol with the head of the department that wants to engage with us, calling us and coming to me as the chair of the tribe and asking to have a meeting whereby we can sit down and discuss the thinking or the proposals that is at hand. It's a very formal process. And the last thing that I will be talking about when we get through our slides are racial inequities, and that's kind of the topic here. And I do have a lot to say, but before I move on, are there any questions about the presentation outline that you see before you?
If you have any questions now or anytime through her talk, please feel free to just unmute yourself and start talking.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, next slide.
Okay.
So from time immemorial, more than 30 tribes and bands composed the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, what is now the modern Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. The area was vast. It was almost all of Western Oregon. There was a huge, extensive trade network. The Willamette Falls that's located near Oregon City is part of our ceded lands area. And my great grandfather's name was Chief Wachino. He was a treaty signer to the 1855 Willamette Valley Treaty, or the Calapooia Treaty. And he and his brother were the keeper of the falls.
Mm.
Willamette Falls was one of the largest areas of commerce that was west of the Mississippi. And Native people came from all over because of the abundance of the resource there, with fish, salmon, sturgeon, lamprey. All of those fish were very abundant. And so they managed the flow of travelers that came, the natives that came. And there was a protocol. The protocol was this: if you come to fish here, that's fine. We love for you to do that, but you have to do it in this way, that you take what you will use. You also will provide a donation to the resident tribe, which was our tribe, the Clackamas people there. And that was the way that it was held. And they used to have potlatches. It was a time of celebration, people coming together, exchanging gifts, and a time for a social gathering time. So it was a fun time. There are other areas that had great significance to our people. Some are down in the Rogue River, the Umpqua Valley, but those are they were very hardy network areas. Coursed along the coast, you had all of the sea-bearing animals and fish that also were abundant in our culture. So we traded foods, and because we had access to the ocean, shells are very important for trade. And so we gathered, we had many shells, we would gather them for you. I don't know if you can see later, but my necklace that I have on right now is made out of dentilium shell.
Can you hold it up a bit, Cheryl? Can you hold it up? There we go.
Oh, beautiful.
Yes.
And it's shells, it's called our money. The wealth of a person was indicated by how much of these shells that you had. And you had layers and layers of them. So the peoples of Grand Ronde were seen as being very wealthy, but that was because we had access to these shells. One of the other things is that in terms of wealth, you also had the capacity to develop strong physical warriors. And when these other natives came to fish or to come to our area, there were games that were played. And it was a game of strength. It was a game of running, foot racing, of wrestling, they would make their own ball, and they would play kind of like almost like a hockey. And they played those games. All of those were fun times, and it enriched the social fabric of the Native American people. So we managed the landscape. The other thing is, when I look at the forests around us, and of course we had a forest wildfire this past year that came almost to our headquarters. We housed and set up the wildlife fire department for the Echo Mountain fire. And for days, it was so smoky there that your eyes were burning continuously. But our way of taking care of the landscape is very different. And when I look at the forest, it's a huge fuel source. And by all accounts, if you study and look into the landscape, when the Europeans first came over, they compared our landscape like their beautiful, pristine gardens. And we managed it by fire. We knew how much you had to burn. They were coal fires. How each area, there was a rotation. There was rotation in years. There were markings that we put on trees. So we knew when to do this. And that fire load was not there then. So hopefully, our voices will be heard, and that those kind of practices can become the norm here in Oregon on how to manage wildfires and how to keep them to a minimum. So we can go ahead and move on.
Sorry.
This is a map of the languages that were spoken here in the western part of Oregon. If you can see, it's very small for me. I can't really see them. But as I mentioned before, there were like 30 different bands, and each one had their own languages. Some of how tribes determine the stock of people that they're from, there are similar language base words that they use. And so, for example, you have like the Upper Umpqua, their base languages were Athabascan. And if you study tribes, that comes from Alaska, comes clear down through Canada, comes through Oregon, and it goes down to the Navajo. And it probably goes past the borders down there as well. But that's a major stock of language. So it's just the way that natives are kind of grouped in where their origins are from. And so I just thought it was important to show the richness of the languages that were here. In course, out of all of this, for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, we took on the Chinook Wawa, which is a trade language. And it's composed of native words, French words, English words, so that people could communicate. Just a reminder that Hudson Bay was very prominent in Oregon. Mm-hmm. And so it was a common language that we shared with them as well. So this is kind of the map that just to show you the vast different tribes that there were back in, I believe this one was probably from the early 1800s. Next slide.
Well, if I can get out of my, I'm trying to find my little, there we go.
So as far as the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, there were 7 treaties that were signed. Many were made because there were various Indian agents who came through the area, but few were ratified. The treaties that we have, of course, they were all ratified. As you can read, Anson Dart and John Gaines treaties provided for reservations in the heart of the Willamette Valley, Lower Columbia, and Northern Coast, some of the most highly valued homelands. These treaties were rejected by Congress. And then from 1853 to 1855, Joel Palmer treaties were signed, and these treaties were ratified by Congress. They also provided for removal of people from their homeland. And just a little word about the treaties. Treaties in the early days, treaties, the inception of treaties came about from before our treaties were negotiated. They started on the East Coast with the East Coast Indians, and it was modeled after the Treaty of Paris, if that will give you an idea, almost verbatim. And it really was to set about the borders of the lands, and it also addressed how you were to behave. So our treaties that we entered into were peace treaties. And of course, we have 7. the treaty that applies to the Willamette Valley is the largest treaty, and I think we have a map of that. So in 1857, the Grand Ronde Reservation was created by executive order, and the Grand Ronde Trail of Tears started because all of the Native people in Western Oregon were marched from locations from as far as Northern California to southwest Washington. So all of the tribes were herded together and marched by foot. There were some that came to the coast reservation. I believe they were put on a boat and brought up the ocean, but the Grand Ronde peoples were marched on foot. And I will say this, that I have 4 treaty signer grandfathers, and one was killed, for those who know the location, up here by Valsette's as they were coming over the mountains, because he said, no more, this is enough. His wife, my great grandmother, had died on the way, and he said, this is enough. We can't continue like this in the dead of winter. During the months of February, it was almost a 2-month march on foot. Some didn't have any moccasins or any way of protecting their feet. So he said, that's it. And so he was killed not far from where I live. So yeah, those things, I have memories and stories. We're an oral people. So I know these things because my grandmother, who was born in 1900, was told by her parents, and they were the ones who were driven up on the march, her parents, how they got to Grand Ronde. And it was a very sorrowful, tearful time, because you had people coming to a land that they had no knowledge of. It was all new to them. And so their usual hunting grounds or the usual fishing grounds, or where they gathered plants for making implements or for food, they were different up here. And so to be driven together with oftentimes your enemy tribes was a very scary thing, I would imagine. And even though the various tribes came from the different areas, there are still, when you go to Grand Ronde, we know the locations of the camps, for example, of the Molalla people, where they camped. We know where the Umpquist camped. We know where the Rogue Rivers camped. They still maintained their separateness like that. Of course, as time went on, that all went away. And because of many land laws that existed, the Dawes Act for diminishment of land, and the Howard Wheeler Act, all of those were about land. And it didn't enrich or enlarge our area that was given by treaty. And remember, the language of the treaty said forever. You will have these forever. The 7 treaties symbolize or memorialized like 4 major things. One was that you will be removed from your homeland, but we will also provide you with health care. Hospital, we have 7 treaties, so I guess that means 7 hospitals. We don't have any, but doctors and nurses to work in those facilities. We will provide you with a school, so 7 schools, and teachers to teach your children. That didn't happen. And that you will be provided with a homeland whereby you can become self-sufficient. Well, again, the area that we were driven to, the soils were not capable of being farm producing lands. They're clay, and they're at the foothills of the mountains. It was not a farming area. So they were to provide us with implements to farm the land, and that didn't happen. So it was a great hardship on the people that were moved. And
I don't have any of these on yours.
Pardon?
Huh, okay.
It definitely is tailored the shows to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Orthodox looks good.
So
And
the
then
Grand Ronde Trail of Tears was appropriately named, I believe, because of all of the sorrows that went on and continue today. So next-
Cheryl, I have a question for you.
sure.
Could you tell us who Anson Dart, John Gaines, and Joel Palmer were?
They were Indian agents that were assigned by the government.
Were
Their
they white
job was,
people? Were they white
Yeah.
people?
yes.
Okay.
And that's the other thing. And remember that when the treaties were signed, you're talking about Native people who had their language as we look from them. That's what they spoke. They did not speak English.
Mhm.
So, you know, I
Cheryl,
say it
Cheryl-
was a pretty lopsided negotiation. Go ahead.
Cheryl, the Indian agents were always white.
Yes, yes. And I think some of these names became prominent here in Oregon and Washington, and
Mhm.
they became part of the Oregon legislature and ended up owning vast
Mhm.
pieces of property here in Oregon.
Yes, I know about Joel Palmer in the Dayton area,
Yes,
and it's a very famous restaurant.
yes.
And I've heard of John Gaines, but I had not heard of Anson Dart.
A lot of his work, yeah, he was here in Oregon. A lot of his work was also with the Washington tribes.
All right.
So,
Cheryl, how did they get these jobs as Indian agents?
well, you know, from my recollection, most were involved with the kind of the army of the United States, because during this area, if you look at the dates, this era, it was about the Civil War time as well. So you had a lot of military people who were interested in some not being involved in the Civil War. And, you know, I don't know what their motivations are, but they ended up here.
Yeah. Okay.
You also know that Phil Sheridan,
Mhm.
famous general, was here at Grand Ronde as well. So,
Yes.
okay, are we ready to?
General Cheryl, General Grant was in Oregon too. Was he involved in any way in the story about Native Americans?
Not to my knowledge, not here in particular to our tribe, but we just had the interaction with Sheridan.
Okay.
And I just have to say that his famous quote is, "The only good Indian is a
It's
dead Indian."
Indian. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm.
So this is the map of our, the boundaries. As I stated, that treaties were really for two things: to establish boundaries and to establish what conduct was acceptable. And of course, they were called peace treaties. So you could not have, you could not have an insurgent, or you couldn't rebel, or you couldn't say that's not right, or no, I want to go back and visit, my ancestors' burial sites. None of that was provided for us. But as you can see, it was mostly Western Oregon. And of course, when explorers looked at Western Oregon, the early ones, they seen how lush and beautiful. It was a rich part of the country. And it certainly was rich in natural resources. As we knew, when the gold rush came, it came into Southern Oregon. The huge trees that, the engineers and foresters, their eyes just lusted after all of the timber that was here. The fish, I mean, the list goes on and on, but that's what was wanted. So the next
Cheryl, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So we're looking at this entire area here was
Mhm.
condensed into this small area here.
That's
So
correct.
how many people are we talking about that were forced to come to this area, this relocation area?
Good question. Thank you. You know, my dog out
That's
there is
okay.
kind
All
of,
right,
That's okay.
that's okay. We're pet friendly.
okay. During the early 1830s, 40s, was when contact was coming more prevalent to Western Oregon. And as I mentioned before, Willamette Falls was a huge hub of industry. And the people's numbered in this whole area here about 100,000 natives. That was in that era. By the time termination happened for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and all of the 30 bands and tribes, there were less than 900.
Oh,
So almost, extinct. Yeah, very, because of malaria, of course, in chicken pox, smallpox, all of them. We're facing a pandemic now, but that just almost wiped out all of our people, but we're here today. That's
so the word that you use that resulted in the Trail of Tears up to this area is called termination, correct?
Yes.
Right.
No, that was the treaty making era.
Okay.
The full dark shaded border, that was a result of the treaties.
I see.
And then it was diminished. There was a temporary reservation that was established at Table Rock,
Okay.
down south for the Southern Indians, and I'm part of the Rogue River Umpqua. So down in that area, past by Medford, there was a small temporary reservation. And the idea was always to move the Indian people to the more arid, undesirable lands.
Of course.
That was the plan.
Mm-hmm.
There was another temporary reservation set up called the Coast Reservation, and many of our people were driven there as well. And then it was diminished as well. And then the Siletz Reservation, but the first reservation was Grand Ronde, and we were all herded to that little reservation. They say it was about 66,000 acres. And then, you remember the Forever Treaty language? That went away in 1954 with the Termination Act. And
Okay.
even that little area was taken from us. And there was no compensation or anything. You're just, the idea was you're free, you're mainstreamed into society, right, and you'll be like everyone else. That was what was there. Some folks believe that the tribe bought into that. One of the first things that I and 3 other council women did back in the early 80s, we were elected to the first council after we were restored in 1983. We made a journey to Sandpoint Archives up in Seattle, and we found the so-called ballad box of termination.
Oh.
And there were 7 ballads in it.
Oh.
Oh, really? Oh, that's my.
Oh my.
And they did not all say yes. So we know it was just a policy. We're marching ahead. This is what we believe is best for you, and it's best for us. I mean, that kind of thinking. And termination happened. And, I lived through termination. I was terminated. I was born in the 40s. So I was a child yet, but I know and felt what was happening. I didn't know why my parents and my grandparents were so tearful. I thought, what's happening? Why are they, what do they mean that we're not going to be an Indian no more? How can I not be an Indian? Those were some of the things that went on back then.
Oh,
So after termination, then we come to 1983. And 1983 was part of our restoration, our celebration, and you can read there kind of the post treaty information, the laws that I talked about, and the Western Oregon Termination Act of '54. All of those are part of our history. Restoration, I mean, that's a more hopeful topic to talk about. So if we could go to the next slide.
I had no idea that you could not leave a reservation. This is something completely new to me tonight. I am just shocked to read this and to hear this.
We still have in our museum the passes. They're kind of a tin type pass that you had to acquire because, again, we were not familiar with the Grand Ronde land. And so we wanted to go back and fish at Willamette Falls. We knew where the fish were. We knew how to, and so we would get the passes to go back there to get fish, or for those who wanted to go down south. That was the arrangement that was made. I know that during that march from the treaty time to relocate us, not all of the tribal members came. And I say that because my great grandfather, who was a treaty signer down for the Umpquas, his name was Chief they call him Bogus or Boggs. And he was the one that was killed on the way to Grand Ronde. His brother hid out, and he eventually received an allotment down around the Roseburg area. And there were others who hid out and stayed in that area. So sometimes some of the people would want to go visit their relative. But yeah, you had to be issued a pass to leave.
Cheryl, I have a question. I grew up in Klamath Falls, and of course we had the Klamath Indians, and I remember doing some a research paper when I was in college about the termination, and as I recall, there was a great deal of money involved with and how does that differ from what you've been talking about? Because I've got something else I want to say about that.
Oh, it differs in the fact that we did not receive compensation for our land. They did. We didn't.
Well, and what you know, one of the things when you win the lottery, they always say the first thing you should do is get a financial consultant. Why did they tell you that? Well, they tell you that because most of us have no idea how we would handle money that was suddenly dumped in our lap, and so that's what happened with many of the Klamath Indians. It was kind of just dumped in their laps, and so then there were these horrendous stories about how the money was misused and all of that sort of thing. No one ever, when they started distributing that money, gave any thought at all about saying, maybe you might need some advice. I never ever heard anyone say that they got advice or it was suggested that they should go to a financial planner or counselor. And so I think that was another part of that neglect that you're talking about.
Yes.
That for most people, that kind of money would, you wouldn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, that's true.
Wow.
So So where we're at today, we were recognized November 22nd, 1983, after a lot of hard work. And people don't really think about that, but because I lived it, I'm aware of what happened. You know, we knew it was a small group of people that says, we're not going to take this. We're still Indian. We have rights. We're going to get this turned around and we're going to be restored. So worked on it for several years. And can you imagine a little bitty handful of people, many of the people who had been terminated in 1954 were gone. So we now probably had, you know, maybe 450 people left. And so we organized, got together and said, we're going to go to Congress and we're going to see that this is turned around. It really wasn't an easy feat because you're asking the greatest nation in the world, the United States of America, to admit they made a wrong decision.
Yeah.
That termination was not good for us. And so, but they did. We had our Senator Hatfield, who is a real champion for us, Lesa Coyne. And so they believed in what we were saying. And they said, this is unjust. We will carry the message forward. And thankfully, all of the others agreed, and we were restored. So in the restoration bill, we put language in there that said that we had need of land, and we had some time to go ahead and have some of our lands returned or restored to us. And so 9,811 acres was restored to us. And I was on council then, and we went out to look at lands and to determine where did we want our reservation to be. And so we ended up with where we're at, and up on the hills north of Grand Ronde is our reservation. And it was primarily timberland, because we seen that it could also serve as an economic base for us. So that was the decision that was made then. And so from then until now, we've been working on building the Grand Ronde community and our tribal infrastructure. And all of that takes a lot of time and money. But you know, we're determined, dedicated people. So we thought, no, we're going to do this. We have been working with partners on our ceded lands, which we exercise treaty rights and restore the species that are there. Again, mentioning that we are environmentally sensitive. And so we work with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We acquire cultural tags whereby we can hunt big game, and also that we can fish. That is not for, go ahead.
Bobby?
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
But I have something that I'm not understanding. I understand when you say ceded land, it's land that was taken away, but then I thought you went back and with the 1988 restoration that it was no longer ceded land.
Well, that is our reservation land now. But
so,
the ceded land is the huge Western Oregon swath of land.
Okay, so when you refer to ceded land, you're referring to that land outside of the land you fought back for.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. So we we do not have subsistent rights for hunting and fishing, but for cultural practices, we use the fish and the big game for our ceremonies, for our burials, for our gatherings together, our potlatches, for our powwows, those kind of things. They are not for subsistence in the way that you think about, I'm going to live off of this. That's not what we're allowed to do yet. We do want to work on that. We are working on that. So anyhow, to bring things up to date, many of our rights remain yet to be acquired. And we are working on those areas of hunting and fishing. And we want to go back to Congress and ask them to restore that full right. So that is something that we are working on.
Cheryl, do our senators play into this with you? Ron Wyden, et cetera. Do they work closely with you on things like this?
We do. We do have some people in DC that meet with them regularly. I often go back to DC and talk with them about our issues, and of course, you know, they're very sensitive and sympathetic to what happened to Grand Ronde, just as Hatfield was. And they know that in order for the United States to be healed, they also need to make some corrections, as well as, you know, our healing for the suffering and the trauma that we endured. So it's a partnership that we maintain and keep working on.
Cheryl, we are on the verge probably of confirming, getting confirmed and having our first Native American as Secretary of Interior. Do you have any connection with her? Do you know what her views are on this? He asks. I'm sure you do.
Well, yeah, Deb Holland.
Yes.
She is Laguna Pueblo, and as a cultural group, they're very different than us. However, they are more clannish. We're tribal, which is all, you know, the whole. And so it's a little different from that, and their landscape is quite different than the Northwest and ours. We're rich in waterways, the ocean, the greenery, all of that, the timber. They're more desert-like, so it's different like that. But, I mean, just as I am aware of those differences, so is she.
Mm-hmm.
But the same kind of injustice has happened to all of us. We have things in common, and that's what we work on, is things in common. And my hope is that she will be confirmed this week to have a Native American who would lead on land issues. And that's why I talked about some of our practices. They were served for thousands of years. We took care of the land. We know how to do that. This was not foreign land to us. So I think our voice will be louder. I hope it is. And that some of these practices can be ingrained in the way business is conducted. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
Well, and she's the first Native American to serve in the cabinet in any position too. So
yes.
Have you met her?
I met her. There were these, when President Obama was president, he had these annual gatherings of Native Americans. He met with them and his top cabinet. And so all of the tribes of the United States gathered there. And yes, she, you know, you don't get to know anyone really in depth, but you greet each other and you know each other. And from that point of view.
Good. That's great.
I know that in California, especially in the last 2 years, when they've had tremendous wildfires and forest fires, that they're finally listening to Native Americans because they've been vocal about forest management, which
Yes.
so many government agencies have ignored, and they know, and they're finally taking that into consideration. And I hope they do here in Oregon too.
I do too. Yes, we've got a lot of work to do, and we're certainly a tribe that wants to be involved, and we have, we know we have 2 ears, so we can listen.
Mhm.
One mouth is so we can speak, and hopefully all of that it'll take time, but we're patient people, and it will happen. I have a strong belief it will. So our tribal vision, as tribal people, we've lived on this land and we're connected to it since time immemorial. And when we go outside, we look, those plants are very familiar. It's like going into your own garden. If you garden, you know what's there, you know what's used for, what you have to, when you have to make sure that the slugs are not running your garden, those things. You know how to take care of it and not harm the earth. That's the same way we know the landscape, and we're willing to work at it. So again, as stewards of the land, we are invested, and we know that we want our children to grow up and that there be a much better place, not only in the landscape as far as geography and agriculture, but with people.
Mm-hmm. That
with people we will have values that unite us rather than separate us.
Carol Christ, you have a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Cheryl.
Cheryl, questions. One is about population. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear
Okay.
you.
One part of my screen says unmute and the other part said muted, so I didn't know which part to believe. Anyway, I know that some of the Confederated tribes people live in or very near to the reservation land. Others live elsewhere in Oregon. And I assume, but I don't know for sure, that there are others who live far away from Oregon. Without going into specific numbers, can you give us an idea in general? And then I'll save my second question for later.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. The majority now of our tribal members live in Oregon, primarily in a proximity of, like Portland and Salem, and we have some around the Eugene area, but primarily the majority of our members do live in Oregon. That was not the case when we were restored. It was exactly the opposite. So more and more of our members are moving home, and we do have people who live even out of this country. Not a whole lot, but we do have people who live in Canada and Australia and New Zealand.
It's good to know that.
Go ahead.
It's good to know that they don't have to renounce the right to live anywhere in order to keep their tribal connection.
That's true.
Okay, my other question is, there was something in the news just today, I think, or yesterday, about a new health center in Salem for opiate abuse. Could you explain that a little?
Yes. One of the things that I don't know if I'll have time to talk about it later, but the health disparities are a huge issue with Native Americans, and they are with our members as well. When you think about all the traumas and the things that have been continually taken from us and displacement and told you're not who you are, you're not Indian, I don't know what we were supposed to be. And you become invisible in your own land. It leaves scars and wounds. So because of those inflictions, our disease burden for suicide, for mental disorders, for substance abuse are greater than the society at large.
Mhm.
And so our idea was that we will operate, and we had in the past, we operated a couple of residential treatment centers one was for adolescents in addictions. We operated that for actually I did, but for many years in Salem. And then we closed that, and the Klamath tribe started up with that program. The other was for women's care, and we yet have a women's residential area that we still do. But this one is for opioid addictions in particular. We all know that the United States was hoodwinked by big pharmacology.
Mhm.
And so they were sold a bill of goods knowing that they were distributing and selling very addictive drugs
Mhm.
and not allowing the people to know, the patients to know that this was occurring. And as a result, millions of people became addicted. And so this is the way that we are going about offering this service. It's located in Salem. The doors aren't open yet. We purchased a building and we have staffed it now. And so we will be opening the doors. I know we will have a groundbreaking, I believe it's mid-April. And so to be part of that healing is, that's a wonderful thing. And to be able to have your life where you can make healthy decisions and expand your lifespan. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Well,
Thanks for
Cheryl,
the
I'm just
explanation.
delighted to hear that news. And I'd like to ask you, do you have any ideas or reports on how the Native American community is responding to COVID vaccinations?
Absolutely. We have been very aggressive about obtaining the vaccine. We, as tribes, you have to make choices. Of course, our health delivery system is the federal Indian Health Service. But after we were terminated, I was hired as the Executive Director of Health and Human Services. And I thought, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm not really trusting that the government has our best interests at heart.
Mhm.
And there was a new law. It was called a pilot project. It was called a self-governance project in the 90s. And tribes could opt to design their own service delivery. And I did that. And you were then able to contract for those dollars and put it in one pool of fund. And if I thought, and in our community and our tribal leaders thought that there were more prevalence in substance abuse, I could move dollars in those program areas. But the funds were so small, and I'll relate this, I was just appalled. The amount of dollars that were on a line item in the big scheme of things for Grand Ronde to treat mental health issues was $23,000.
Oh,
Can you imagine?
No.
oh.
And I thought, my gosh, I've got to work harder. And so I did a lot of grant writing and a lot of appeals. And so we were able to put together a healthcare system. And gaming came about not long after that. And so we were able to open the doors of the Spirit Mountain Casino, who has been able to provide the revenue source for our tribe to develop a self-insurance program for our members. We've really, because the federal government, even though they have the trust responsibility, as I stated in our treaties, they have not really, even the tip of the iceberg funding hasn't come like that. So our tribe uses our gaming dollars for healthcare for our members.
Good.
Without it, it would be awful.
That's great. That's great news.
So as we're moving along, we see that our ceded lands and areas of cultural interest, we've talked about them. The plants that you see there are really our staple. It's like a potato. It's the bulb of the plant there, and the scientific name is there, but we call them wapto. But there are plants, and there are herbs. There are other plants that we use for construction of our baskets. For those kind of things, we carve. So, the land is very important because it supplies us all of those things. And we talk with other governments, and we ask about these areas, and sometimes we enter into agreement for use permits, for the ability to hold a ceremony or an activity there, and it's moving along. I'm very thankful that people understand that. Our next slide.
Oh, the camas.
Consultation. Yes, that is camas.
Love camas.
There is a deadly form of the camas that a lot of folks don't know about because most people don't eat camas. We do, but it's white. So don't ever try to pull up a white camas and eat it. It's pretty deadly. So anyhow, consultation starts with an acknowledgement and outreach. When, for example, if the state of Oregon decided that they were going to name the Yamhill River, they were going to change it, and they wanted to name it Hollywood. They would have to consult with us and say, well, we really thought about this. This is important to us. It's named after your language. What do you think? And so we get together then as their officials and our officials, and we talk about that. And if they, hear us, generally they'll say, oh yeah, well, yeah, that was there long before Hollywood anyhow. So we'll continue down the path and keep that name there. But it is a formal process, generally starts with a written document and then an engagement to meet, and we exchange documents and information. But it's pretty official. The next. Okay, racial inequalities. I'll just take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about where I believe the racial inequity started. Way back when there was a document called, there was Manifest Destiny, and then there was the Doctrine of Discovery. Manifest Destiny was basically common held belief that white settlement and expansion across North America was inevitable and evenly divine ordained. But long before then, this ideology provided the justification for ethnic cleansing and systematic displacement. In many ways, it continues to inform policymakers to this day. And for those who are aware, we know that the Doctrine of Discovery basically contained, was addressing how to acquire land, and that the superior race would be the ones who should take charge of the lands. And, you know, I thought, well, let me see, we're talking about racial inequities. What is racism? And so I looked at a number of different sources. It says it's a noun, it's prejudice, it's discrimination, it's directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. And then the other is a belief of doctrine that inherent differences among the various human racial groups determine cultural or individual achievement, usually involving the idea that one's own race is superior and has the right to dominate others, or that a particular racial group is inferior to others. And then Wikipedia, of course, says racism is the belief that groups of humans possess different behavioral traits responding to physical appearance and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another. So I thought, well, yes, you know, that's something that I think that we, just to lay the background for where I'm going, the Doctrine of Discovery started in 1493, and it basically was the papal bulls who said that that in order for lands, this was during the time of exploration, he stated that any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited by Christian rulers, and declared that the Catholic faith and the Christian religion be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, that the health of souls be cared for, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. And then the Doctrine of Discovery became the basis of all European claims in the Americas, as well as the foundation for the United States Western expansion. So those were doctrines and policies that were enacted in the way of the conquering of North America and the effects that it had on the resident people of the United States of America. And so it's been taught and taught and taught in school. This is what you do. This is how you go about doing that. And the reason why you're able to do this is because it's not spoken like because you're the superior race, but that's the connotation that you know best. You know what's best for these people. And it plays out in policy making. We talked a little bit about the diseases and about this pandemic that we're in. And some of the statistics that we know, and I know because of my health background, is that the health disparities of Native Americans is huge. But in this research that was done by Bloomberg, it says Native Americans are more than twice as likely as white adults to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And that it also says that, but these statistics only scratch the surface of the kinds of health disparities that Indigenous people face. Also, nationally, the average life expectancy for a Native American person born today is 73 years old. It's 5.5 years below that of all other races. And for Grand Ronde, our mortality rate is for women, it's 66. And for men, it is 63. So we're even less than the average other tribes. And that our rates, our national suicide rates have gone up to 33% since 1999. So we have a huge disease burden. There's another public health phrase I'll use. It's the YPLL. It's the years productive life lost. It's very high for Native Americans, and the funds that are spent on the various groups, because you have Medicaid, Medicare, the prisoners, Native Americans that are allocated or appropriated dollars. And the dollars spent on the average person in the national healthcare system is $9,202. And that was from a 2018 report on funding shortfalls by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. But the dollar amount spent on Native Americans is $3,332. And so, that kind of explains really why we have a higher disease burden, because we don't have the funds that it takes, the federal dollars, we all pay taxes, that it takes to address these problems that are going on. And when we talk about appropriations, of course, all of those are tied to policy. You have, like now, we have the health policy, and it sets out kind of goals in a broad way. And then you go to OMB, Office of Management and Budget, who manipulates figures, and they say, oh, this is what you spent last year. Oh, we'll add 3% onto it, never addressing the real shortfall. So it continues to be perpetuated. And I served as the executive director, as stated earlier, of the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board, and often went to Congress with my charts, with my data. I'd say, this is what you're facing. You've got to change this scenario. We believe that the policy of the United States is still to continue to eradicate Native Americans of their lands. That just doesn't sit well. And so we would try to influence, compel them to come along with us. And let's address this. Let's do this together. We all have a right to live on this earth. And so funding is played out in some strange ways. I just got an announcement from SAMHSA. It says, with the pandemic worsening, the mental illness and addiction crisis, there's going to be nearly $2.5 billion that's provided to states, territories for treatment and prevention. Well, that's all based on data. And the data cells that they rely on do not contain the tribal data. We operate a clinic out at Grand Ronde. We serve our community, other natives, and ourselves. But that is not the data set that is used, that goes to OMB, that says this is the lay of the land. And I know I can say this for years. I've gone to the Hill and testified over and over and over. You've got to change and include the data set from tribes. And I'll relate this to Oregon. When HIV and AIDS was first, very prominent, Christine Gebbe was the health authority at the time. And she said, there's no AIDS or HIV in Native American communities in Oregon. And I thought, that is not right. And so I asked for the data sets. And the reason that we did not have it, which I knew we were treating some was because there was no box on the form that checked Native American. There was no Native American box.
Gee.
I got a notice from the state of Oregon that just issued yesterday that they are now adding a box for Native Americans. They will not go with general all others, so that we can get funding to address all of the many diseases, including this pandemic that's going on.
And that was yesterday, Cheryl, you got that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Isn't that so? The thinking, I'm bringing it forward from the Doctrine of Discovery and from all of the policies that are embedded. They're still there today. And so as we get informed and we can advocate, you know, that's where we all need to be. I know that there are a lot of caring people out there. They just don't know. Some know, and maybe it won't make a difference if they, you know, but I do know that this message has to get out. I believe that the solution to racial inequities is based in how America came to be. And when I look at my Congress, how many are there like me?
Exactly.
And I don't know, you know, I've spoke with a lot of our congressional folks, and I believe they want to do the right thing. I believe that they can see that, but how to get through the mire is another thing. But I do believe that these kind of forums help to get the word out, that we can talk with one another and not accuse each, oh, you did it, or you're not doing what, or you're whatever. But to sit down and understand the issues that are before us and that change can happen. I guess I've been a hopeful person, and I will continue down that path. I know
Cheryl.
that in various religions, there are doctrines about how we treat one another. I think it's time. Yes, I heard someone speak. Did someone?
Fred,
I just wanted to say, Cheryl, I was kind of head there too. You know, I know my own church, the Episcopal Church, has opposed officially the doctrine of discovery, but you know, there's no percentage in not doing it, and so people wonder what can I do? You know, I have no idea what faiths we have represented here in this group, but you know, a word to whoever the leaders of your faith might be, and whoever might be going to a convention. What about putting a resolution up to oppose like the doctrine of discovery? There's no percentage in not doing it. I mean, there's no theological basis for not doing it. And what does it take to pass a resolution? And then what that does, though, most of the faiths have a lobbying group that works with Congress. And so it would be really nice, Cheryl, when you're there appearing before a congressional committee, if you've got various faiths that are there to back you up and support you. And I think that's a good way that this group could be very helpful.
and Cheryl, one of our participants tonight, Janice, asked the question in chat, how can we help? That's one area. And is there something else individually that we can do for Grand Ronde? What can we do to help? And if you could maybe put some suggestions together and send them to me through email.
Okay.
I would love that. I will get that out. I will post on Facebook. I know of at least 5 other people here tonight that are on Facebook that will take what I get and share it out there too, because that's how we have to spread the word. I have found the last several months in the learnings in these conversations that so much is just not on our radar. It's just not there. It's like, oh my goodness. It's all these aha moments that we need to share. That's how we enlighten, and that's how we educate our communities. And it starts with us.
I've got a quick comment. This is Darcy.
Yeah, Darcy.
Yeah, hi. I worked with a special needs student that was Native American, and I worked in a middle school with him. I was very honored to have him as a student. He taught me so much about he was from Grand Ronde and 100% Native American child. And he definitely had his ups and downs, but he kept me challenged. And so the main comment I had was about 5 years ago, I've been retired a couple of years now, but about 5 years ago, they brought in a whole bunch of different speakers into Parish Middle School for the Native American students. And I got to go sit in with my student and be a part of that. And it was so wonderful. And I was wondering if that is still happening with Salem Kaiser, because that's such a good outreach, and it'd be a good outreach here in Dallas too. So that's my comments.
Well, thank you. Yes, Shelby Olson, or Merritt's now, is still doing that. Of course, with COVID, everything is kind of locked down, and I don't know if they've organized anything virtual or not. But I do know that there's going to be a virtual graduation concerning Native American graduation. I think it's in May. I know my husband often participates in that. But yeah, you're right. It's those kind of things that help really close the gap, as well as inform others and ourselves, to keep us always invigorated, so that we're always able to help others who might not see it from that perspective. So I hope that the information I've given tonight will help you when you meet, some things. I know that earlier this year there was a gathering downtown Dallas, and I happened just to be driving through, and it wasn't it was more like a fight, and I thought, whoa, and someone yelled out my name as I was driving past, so I pulled over and stopped. And I thought, gosh, our community is, but one of the things I just have to say is that I'm not oblivious of what happens here in Dallas. I live here right on Ellendale, and when I'm out cleaning my yard, there have been some that just yell out their windows and they tell me, "Taco Bender, go home."
Oh,
And I told my husband, we're gonna have to put a big totem pole out there so they'll know we're Native American.
Oh, my Cheryl.
And I had two grandchildren I raised that graduated at Dallas High School. And I don't know if any of you know, but the KK garb was housed in the school. And there were some students who put it on, and they ran after my grandchildren and other students of color. Of course, I went to the school and made some demands, and they kind of passed it off. Oh, it just boys will be boys. And I said, no, you're tolerating that. And you're perpetuating that kind of action. That is not right. This is not safe. And I do all of that. But anyhow, my grandson graduated. We're Native American. He went to the counselor, said, I'd like to have some beading put on my cap, and got it approved. Well, when he went out, you all know that they graduate out in the big football field and everyone is out there. The principal, seen that, marched down in front of everyone and just yanked his cap off of his head and told him, you are not to be wearing that. Oh, and I seen that happening. I just ran down in that field and I just told him, you keep your hands off. That is sacred to us.
Oh.
And your angry, way and your humiliation, all of this in front of this whole crowd of people. You're a teacher. What are you teaching here? And, that's the kind of why I talk about policy and why I talk about where the roots of where all of this is coming. But I do have a younger grandson that he doesn't go to public school here. We put him in a Christian school, private school. He's a senior now because I thought he doesn't need that.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I know that stuff happens. I'm not, putting my head in the sand or anything, but I do have hope. I do have hope because you all are listening. And I can see that this is what you're hearing is egregious. These actions that happen. So, but we live, we get through them. We continue to march forward and to try to be pure in heart. That's really what this is about, is our heart. So anyhow, I know our time might be up. I don't know.
Cheryl, I hope you'll come back.
This has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Cheryl, thank you. I don't know. I have a quick announcement to make to everyone here. But I just want to thank you with my whole heart.
Oh, yes.
This was just a blessing to have you here tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I want to tell everyone that about almost 70 years ago, a young man sitting here tonight, Fred Hurd, had a pen pal with a young man over in Ireland. Well, one thing led to the next, and they stayed pen pals. And about a year or so ago, the grandchild of the young boy pen pal in Ireland asked his grandpa about this, and his grandpa answered him. The mom was sitting there and said, I wonder where this person is. One thing led to the next, and the two pen pals were reunioned before Christmas. Fred Hurd and his pen pal Jim Johnson in Belfast. The Statesman Journal wrote a wonderful article about it right before Christmas. Well, it was right at Christmas. And NBC Today Show has picked it up and has done a taping and is set to show this coming Wednesday on St. Patrick's Day. So set your DVRs, your VCRs, if you want to see a very heartwarming story of two young boys who kept a connection and still have a connection and a wonderful renewed friendship. It's a beautiful story. So I just wanted everybody to know that. You'll see about it on our Facebook page. But again, Cheryl, thank you.
And I would like to just mention this book, Unsettling Truths.
Thank you.
Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery.
Excellent. And who is the author, Maureen?
Mark Charles and Songchan Ra.
Yes. Okay. Great. I will.
I'll be on the list, Maureen.
Yeah, I always send out a list in my summary, and I will put that on there. Thank you so much.
And also the tribe has a really good historical information on its website. They've done a really great job.
Cool.
So
I think you're going to be saying Cheryl again if I read her answer correctly, and I just am so impressed and pleased, Cheryl, that you were with us tonight. Thank you, Maureen, for what you just said.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here tonight with us. We so appreciate it. And we will see you next week, which is our last session of our winter series. It's going to be a basic American history session, bringing in all sorts of things, and it will be presented by a guest presenter, a professor, a history professor. So we look forward to next week, and I'll get my summary of tonight out tomorrow to everyone, and have a good week, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.